Hello, everyone. Chris Martenson of Peak Prosperity here, back with your weekly update. Well, here we are. It's March 8th and 2018. Now, wow, such an amazing week in the markets. Not a single down day for equities. In fact, there's just screaming higher, and it doesn't matter if Trump is threatening trade barrier tariffs or any of this stuff. Who cares? Because the world, everything's awesome. Now, as you know, Peak Prosperity, we're all about the data, and I like to call BS on stuff when I see BS. So this is how I'm going to decode something for you today. This is really important, not because it's just more mundane sort of lying by official agencies, but I want to show you how we use data to sort of pick these things apart. So today's employment report, so this is going to be very educational. I hope you like this. This is what we do at Peak Prosperity. We look at stuff like this, which says, this was amazing. Look at this. Outsized gains in the U.S. job market, 311,000 jobs created, including 50,000 jobs in retail. Now, anybody who's been following along knows there's been a lot of store closures, and retail has been getting its butt kicked by online retailing and all of that, but somehow 50,000 jobs in retail. Now, I could pick apart the whole employment report, but I'm just going to use this one subsection to sort of show you where I'm going to call BS on this, and it's a lot of BS. So here's how it works. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the total number of job gains, which are 397,000 new jobs in retail. Look at that from the bottom there in the 2009 trough all the way up, just like a straight line. And when you look at and you compare the peak where we are at today with where we were at the peak in 2007. I think this was probably March. That was probably, I think the peak of this one was May 2007. There's 397,000 more jobs in retail. Hey, and that kind of makes sense because if we look at what the government's also reporting in terms of retail sales, we get this number. See that little trough down there? Woo, just straight, like consumers are just buying more and more and more all the way through. And so what we're seeing in this particular thing is that retail sales are up 10%. So how much were those jobs up? Well, those were up, I think, about 2.6%. So 2.6% more people selling around 10% more stuff. That doesn't sound too bad. Retailers should be rolling in profits because when you're using fewer people to sell more stuff, that's great. That's great. Now, there's just one thing that we have to notice here, which is this. And it comes to us when we actually understand how those retail sales, remember, they're up 10%, 10.4. They're up huge amounts, right? Whoops. What we notice is that the way that statistic is constructed is those numbers are not inflation adjusted. What? Hold on. Here's the problem. Let's say you're an auto dealer and you sell 10 cars last year for $200,000. And this year you sell 10 cars for $250,000. How many more people do you need to sell 10 cars this year compared to 10 cars last year? And the answer is 0. You have to inflation adjust the numbers. The fact that you're selling the same number of cars for more money, called inflation, that doesn't really tell us anything. So we have to inflation adjust the numbers. So let's see what happens when we do that. Now, how much inflation has gone up since that March, April, I think it was May 2007. How much has inflation gone up? Well, it's gone up by 21%, or about 1.8% a year. I know that doesn't sound like much, 1.8%, but it actually matters. So now what happens when we take those same retail numbers and we inflation adjust them to strip out the effects of inflation? Now, again, this might not be totally accurate because inflation in the retail trade might be different from inflation overall. I didn't take the time to really break that out, but we're probably in the ballpark to just use generalized inflation using the ultra low, probably fictitiously low number of 1.8% per year of inflation. By the way, if you've been trying to make ends meet over those same last 10 years in any metro urban area with rents and food and healthcare, all that stuff, you know inflation's not 1.8% a year. It's much higher. But let's just use that as that fiction in this for these purposes. So here's what happens when we take the final retail sales and the advanced retail sales number, and we inflation adjust them. We discover this, that from their prior peak there in, this peak happens to be in May of 2007. So guess what? sales peaked right before employment peaked 2 months later, and then employment fell. At any rate, what we're supposed to believe is that somehow, after we inflation adjust these retail numbers, that they are actually not 10% higher than they used to be, but in fact, they are almost a little over 9%, 9.1% lower on a dollar adjusted basis than they were at the peak in 2007. That's a decline of, on this chart, $19 billion on a monthly basis. So when we do that, that's what we discover is that somehow now retail, the number of people being employed in retail is 400,000 more almost to sell almost 9% less stuff once we inflation adjust it. Time out. I'm just calling BS on that whole thing. It's just ridiculous, but it doesn't matter. The Dow is up 400 points today. It's been up all week. This is great news. It was a Goldilocks report. It was everything the central bank, the Federal Reserve wanted. Sounded great. Strong job growth, but oh my gosh, not too much wage growth. In fact, it ticked downwards. More people being employed, but kind of at lower wages. And that's perfect. If what you want to do is send a narrative out there that says everything's good, it's all awesome. But how we can have 50,000 more people being employed in an industry that in the last 10 years is selling a roughly 9% less actual stuff on a unit basis doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that the whole thing just doesn't really fall together or hang together nicely. Now, this is not to say it's completely wrong, and maybe directionally it's correct, but these are BS numbers that are then used by the system to justify and create this big 400 point Dow gain for the day and all that stuff. This is the game that we're in. And meanwhile, what do we notice? Well, we notice that there's this trade wars. Just wrote a piece about that at the site. You could come check that out. And we also, listen, the world can't sustain this growth anymore. We just can't. Let's stop the fictions already. We don't need to tell ourselves fibs in order to convince more people they should feel good so they can spend more money so that they can then borrow more money so our banking system can then make more loans and be happy and healthy. That's not a healthy system. All you have to do is look out at the ecosphere and check out what's happening out there in the real world to whales, songbirds, insects, soil, phytoplankton, all the rest to say, oh my gosh, can we just stop? Can we just stop the fiction? Can we just stop lying to ourselves so that we can feel good about how many McJobs are being created and all that stuff? Can we just be honest about this? It's time to stop the credit madness. It's time to stop this whole thing that the system's all about making more loans so people can borrow more so the banks can be healthy. It's a perverse system. It's not healthy. And just to back up, it all begins and ends with ridiculous fictions like this one. This is just ridiculous. Through 50,000 more people in retail. Stop. So if you're working at the BLS and you're collecting these things and you have any information about how you've been asked to fudge these numbers or anything like that, hey, I'd love to get that information from you if you can do that in a private way or get it to WikiLeaks, get it out there. What's going on here? This just doesn't make sense. So with that, I'm Chris Martenson. I will see you next week. Please come to Peak Prosperity and check out analysis like this and other fascinating topics. All right, bye.